Welcome everyone to a special screening of the Center for Latin American Studies of the Jamaica and Tamarindo film. We have a Q&A session with Director Evoni Bailey. I'm Alberto Diaz-Calleros, the Director of the Center of Latin American Studies here at Stanford. And this conversation, since it is going to happen through Zoom, I do want to start by just letting you know some housekeeping issues of the webinar. It is, only speakers will be able to share their screen, their video, and you are all attendees in listen-only mode. Kindly note that this is being recorded and it is being live streamed in our YouTube page. So if you want to be able to, if you want to ask questions, you should be joining the webinar version. And in the live stream chat, you are not going to be able to make this kind of reliable connection, but do use your Q&A button throughout the seminar, and I will be able then to read some of your questions to Director Evoni Bailey. Before we start, I do want to remind all of us that as in every event we do at class, that we want to acknowledge that we are on the native land that we are living in, and give some words of gratitude for those of us who are here at Stanford, who are then in the land and the territory of the Ohlone original peoples. As such, it is important to say that we offer gratitude to the land, to the water, to the air that surrounds us, as well as paying our respects to the past, the present, and the future of the Ohlone and the Lenape people who continue to be present in their homelands and throughout their diasporas. So let me then now introduce you our Director Evoni Bailey. I do want to thank EPF Media for co-sponsoring this conversation. It wouldn't be possible without them, and for providing a courtesy link for everyone to be able to see the film throughout the week. EPF Media is committed to releasing films that inspire people and bring positive change to our communities, such as Jamaica Tamarindo, Afro Tradition in the heart of Mexico. Our guest director, Ebony Bailey, she's a Blaxican filmmaker and photographer from Central California, whose work explores the cultural intersections and the diaspora. Her documentaries have been screened at various film festivals and fora in the US, in Mexico, in Europe. Her photographs have also been shown in LA Times, Remezcla, NPR. She has been awarded the Samuel L. Coleman Scholarship for Emerging Filmmakers at the Haitian International Film Festival, and was selected for the Tomorrow's Filmmakers Today program by HBO and Hola Mexico Film Festival. She is currently completing her MA degree in documentary film at UNAM, and Ebony tells stories through film as a way to represent her communities and to build spaces of empowerment between our many diverse populations. So Ebony, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for coming. It's an honor to be here.
I think if anybody else or anybody has questions now, we can start sending the Q&A around. So anybody could go on the bottom of the page where it says Q&A, and in that button you can start sending in questions, and we'll be moderating them and reading them aloud to Director Ebony Bailey. Thank you.
Are you waiting for me to start asking a question to Ebony?
Yeah, you can begin.
Because my understanding was that we were going to have a little bit of the film first, but then I probably misunderstood.
No, we sent the stream first.
Okay, so I apologize for that. I thought we were going to see a little clip of the screening first. Obviously there are some people that have already started asking some questions, but the most obvious question that I want to start with is, if she can tell us a little bit about what motivated her and got her started in this project, and then I will start asking a few of the questions that people are starting asking for us.
Hi. Yes, so sorry about that too. I think you had frozen for a little bit too, so I was also just a little confused. But yeah, I can talk about how I got started. Let me know if I freeze. I think my internet's being a little weird today. But so this was actually my master's thesis project at UNAM. I studied documentary film at UNAM, which is the National Public University in Mexico City. And and I originally wanted to do this project because for my thesis project, I wanted to do something on Blackness in Mexico, because I had done a previous short film on Black migrants in Mexico, specifically the Tijuana-San Diego border. But this time I wanted to explore more Afro-Mexicanidad, or Blackness that has been in Mexico since the beginning of Mexico's time. So I had this huge project thought up at first that was just too big and like too broad, and I had all these different aspects of negritud or Blackness in Mexico. Like I was like, I'm going to talk about family here, and then music, and then migration, and then history, and then food, and all this stuff. And I started to narrow down when I kind of started researching about this topic, and I started learning about the origins of La Flor de Jamaica y Tamarindo, because I didn't even know about the origins until I started working on this film. And so I was talking to one of my friends, and we were she's Afro-Mexicana. She's also in the film. Her name's Leona. She's the one with the braids. And we were talking just about food, because we both really like food. And she told me, like, did you know that La Flor de Jamaica was from Africa? And I said, what? I did not know that, because as someone, as you mentioned, I'm Blaxican, and I grew up in Central California, which has a very high Mexican American population. So I grew up drinking agua de Jamaica and eating the dulces de tamarindo. And so I always associated these two ingredients with Mexico. So when I learned that, I kind of went into the internet rabbit hole that night to search more about the history and to confirm what my friend told me. And it was true. So I still had, as the semesters went on, I still had like an idea to do something really broad. But I always knew that I wanted to do something with La Flor de Jamaica. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I wanted to do that. And then in my third semester, one of my classmates, he has a friend who works for CEDEREC, which is like a secretary of indigenous and mostly indigenous development in Mexico City, but also they have had like their office has kind of changed now since the new government came in a few years ago. But they have these projects where they can give small grants to projects that promote indigenous and Afro heritage. And it could be any type of project, like a workshop or like a visual media or visual art or anything. And so my friend was like, I know, aren't you doing something on Afro-Mexicanidad? And I said, yeah, but the project's still really broad, and I think you need like a specific project for this. No? And he said, yeah, I mean, you could. And he told me that I could just ¿cómo se llama? Como meter, like I could apply with a part of my project and just do a separate short for that program. And so we were coming up with like a short for that program, and it was only going to be like 5 to 10 minutes long, and we named the short Jamaica y Tamarindo. And so that's kind of how it started, by just like coming up with the name. And then I think from there, that's when I started getting just more clarity on what to focus on for the film. And so yeah, then I interviewed, I first had interviewed Leona, who was my friend, and she's the one with the braids. And then I interviewed Chai and Suri, and they're two brothers, and they're from La Costa Chica de Oaxaca. And I also interviewed Seina, and these are all my friends. And each of them has a diverse, I call it like a diverse way of Blackness, but also they have diverse interests. Like Seina, her Blackness is from Africa. Her dad is from Africa. Chai and Suri are from La Costa Chica de Oaxaca. And so they're descendants of people who were brought here from Africa centuries ago. And Leona is born and raised in Mexico City, so her Afrodescendencia is more like central Mexico. And then I hadn't interviewed Marbella, who's the one who talks about her relationship with Jamaica and Tamarindo when she was younger. I interviewed her later after I had already finished the first version for that program. So I finished the first version, which was 10 minutes long, and the short just kind of sat there for like a year, and I didn't know what to do with it. I was just going to release it on Vimeo, but then after a while, people started saying like, why don't you make this your thesis project? Because I still had this like big idea for the thesis project. And I was like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't just make this short my thesis project and just make it longer and focus in on the dialogue between Mexico City and Costa Chica, because the first version was only Mexico City. And so that's kind of how it all came. It was a lot of like practical decisions that were coinciding with creative decisions.
That's wonderful. Thank you. There's so much in what you just told us. There are already some of the questions from the public that you are answering. Somebody asked actually saying, hi, Ebony, could you share about how you found the participants in the video? And I was thinking about Leona in particular. But I do want to ask a question, you know, combining two people are asking different versions of the same question. So Sonia Perez asks you a little bit about how do you respond to people when you live in Mexico City questioning in some way your presence in the city? And we know, you know, the latest census, 2.6 million Mexicans clearly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I don't think that's really the true number of people who self-identified as Afro-Mexicanos. But then there is a similar question also about our Blaxican in California. So in a way, you know, in both cases, you have this kind of identity that people don't necessarily know what to do with it. So I wanted to ask you if you could address a little bit Sonia's and Elizabeth's question on California side.
Yeah, I can go chronologically. So I grew up in Central California, Porterville, California. That's where I am right now, actually. I'm visiting family. And Porterville, California, it has a very high Mexican-American population, Mexican population. A lot of agriculture here. My family came to work in the fields, and so we've just stayed here. And and yeah, like my family kind of, you know, I grew up in like I would say, or at least at the time, you know, I would think of it as like a very like Mexican-American household, like eating menudo on Sundays and tamales for Christmas, pozole also for Christmas and stuff like that. And so I felt very Mexican, I guess, you know, with my family and just being in that community. But whenever I would go to school, my classmates would definitely let me know that I wasn't like them. And there was a lot of like, you know, the bullying of my skin color and in Spanish and thinking that I wouldn't understand them, even though I did. And back then when I was younger, I grew up listening to Spanish, but I didn't really speak it that much. I more so understood it. And so I think that was also part of the reason why I really made an effort to learn Spanish and immerse myself in Spanish, was because I had this like constant like like I wanted to prove my Mexicanness to people, because I guess it was just a thing of like having that part of my identity negated from me. I just felt the need that I had to prove it to people. So learning Spanish, at least in the beginning, was kind of that, like learning to prove, having to prove that I'm Mexican to people. And now I don't really feel that way about Spanish, or about like, I don't really feel that I need to prove myself to anybody, but at the time when I was younger, you know, everybody has like these identity crises in some way. And so that was mine, to try to prove myself to my Mexican and Mexican-American classmates. And yeah, and then I think that coming to Mexico has been really interesting, because for one, I've learned that a lot of the things that I consider Mexican, at least growing up, are more so considered pocho, at least in Mexico City. Like eating tamales in Christmas, nobody does that in Mexico City. And like even having menudo on Sundays, I wouldn't say that that's pocho, but like a lot of people in Mexico do not eat menudo, or they even call it, I think they call it pancita, they don't even call it menudo. So there's just like a lot of different things that, you know, it makes you really learn like the nuance. Finally actually coming and living in Mexico, like really was like a reality check. And like, you know, it's not not everything is the same in this country. There's a lot of regional differences and all that stuff. But as in terms of being treated, yeah, I think that my presence is definitely always questioned in Mexico. The question, where are you from, or de donde eres, I think is something that can seem so innocent to a lot of people, but it can really be kind of harmful, honestly, especially to a lot of Black people, especially Black Mexicans. I think for me, I'm a little, I mean, it does get like tiring to answer that question for me personally, but I kind of understand it too, because I am still a foreigner. I still was born in California. But for people who are Afro-Mexican, who are born and raised in Mexico, that constant question of de donde eres, where you're from, is like super just so tiring to just have to prove your own presence and existence in your own country. And like for me now, I say, I kind of like answer the question, but also like I kind of weirdly answer it. I say, soy mexicana. So I say, I am Mexican. And so then people will be like, no, no, pero de donde, no? Like they'll be like, what, Mexican? Like I try to do that in order to like get people to question themselves too. And like, you know, why are you asking this Black person where they're from, but you're not asking other people where they're from? And sometimes though, I'll say, oh, I'm from California. And people will say, oh, but where's your family from? And I'll be like, Mexico, because my dad's side of the family is African American, so they've been in the South for many generations. And and so it's just funny whenever those two questions, whenever I answer those questions either in those two ways, just seeing people's reaction of like, no, pero es que no, pero eso es imposible. Like before, it used to be eso de que no hay negros en Mexico. Like I've never seen a Black person in Mexico, no. And now I feel like when that conversation comes up, like sometimes people will acknowledge like, oh, in Mexico City, I don't see that. I see that like in La Costa. So I guess there's a little consciousness, but yeah, I still think that it can be a really harmful question. And I think that my experience in general has been one of like where I receive a lot of what I like to call innocent racism, where it's like, oh, they want to touch my hair, or they're asking about my skin or something like that. So it hasn't been like that aggressive, though I have had aggressive experiences, especially in Tijuana, with like border agents and stuff like that, and people thinking that I'm Haitian and just like having really aggressive experiences, or people even saying like pejorative terms to me in Spanish, in other parts of Mexico too, and about specifically about being Black. So there has been some aggressive instances too, but I would say for the most part, it's more of like the innocent racism, which is still racism. So that's why I still call it that. But I also have the added privilege of being from the US and having an American passport. So it is different than someone who is from Haiti or who's from Africa or even from Colombia too, because there's a lot of xenophobic sentiments in Mexico.
Yeah, I have to say, I have to disagree with you that I don't think any racism can be innocent. It could be naive or other things, but I don't think it is innocent for what it's worth. But let me follow up on, it's not exactly the order in which I'm getting the questions, but I think it follows in the conversation. Adrienne Lazaro is asking you a little bit about the differences of the Black experience in the city versus the differences in the coast that are explored in the movie. So could you tell us a little bit about whether this difference, coast versus Mexico City, does that mirror your experience growing up here in California, or you know, is it partly, you know, the way I think of it, do you need like almost like a critical mass of Blackness to be able to have people think of it as a, you know, recognize, you know, that you know, this difference exists in their midst, which is really paradoxical, I would say. But anyway, I think that's a very important question. People in Mexico, I agree with you, they tend to recognize the Afro-Mexican, Afro-descendants in the coasts, but they don't want to see them in other places, which is very strange.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that
there's a film that I released.
Sorry. But yeah, exactly what you're saying. I think that there is like for me, I could see the experiences being mirrored. I think my experiences more so mirror the people who grew up in Mexico City, even though I didn't grow up in a city, but I grew up in a space where there aren't that many Black people, and a space where there's a lot of Mexican and Mexican Americans. So the constant of being in school, of people just like negating that side of my identity, I saw that as really very similar to the people that I spoke to who grew up in Mexico City, that had like the constant of them being pointed out at school or being made fun of at school when they're growing up, or feeling like they're not in place. Like that definitely, I think it's similar because they're both two places where you don't see a lot of visible Blackness. And so in that sense, there is a little bit of similarity. And I think that that's where I found like some, I guess, yeah, in all of these experiences, I found like some kinship and some just parallels of experiences, which I think is really cool, considering that we grew up on different sides of the border. But I would say, yeah, for people who grew up in La Costa, as they said in the documentary, you know, it's like we had consciousness that we were Afro, but it wasn't something that was like put in our face all the time because everybody in the pueblo is Afro, no? Until we moved to the city. And that's when we were always in question. And that also kind of mirrors my experience a little bit because I grew up, my first few years of my life were in Virginia, and I never felt like that my Blackness was in question or anything like that because my school was all Black, my neighborhood was Black. And so it wasn't even that much of a question for me until I was 5 and I moved to California. And I specifically vividly remember kind of just being like this odd person out and being like pointed at, or like, no sé cómo decir, como un foco rojo, like all the time. Just being like just being like that target of people, or whenever, you know, Black history was talked about at school or something, people would always stare at me or my brother and just things like that. So I feel like in that sense, there's also similarities of like growing up in or being in like a majority Black space and not really feeling like your Blackness in your face in that sense, and then moving somewhere else where there aren't a lot of Black people, and then it's just so yeah. And I think it's even more so in Mexico, when you're from Mexico and the whole idea of Blackness and Afrodescendencia has been erased, and so it really does make people feel like they're out of place in their own countries.
That's so interesting. There is a great question from Rocio Fregoso. I hope we can address it. It's a very difficult question, but she asks about Senegalese background. So she mentions, you know, whether you can tell us more. Do you know more about this, for example, Senegalese background that maybe some Black Mexicans have because of a participant in the video that shares that? And is there things like, for example, things that might be transmitted through similarities in food or Senegalese food, or some traces of those things that might be quite distant in the past? You know, do you have any insight on that?
A little, not too much, just from what Seina has told me, because she's Senegalese. Her dad is from Senegal, and Seina is the one who's the cook or the chef in the film, and she's Diola specifically. And she's also Mixteca, so I really think it's cool how she knows both of, like, she has indigenous knowledge from both sides of her family, from the Diola side in Africa and then from the Mixteca side in Mexico. But yeah, just from what she's told me, that it's funny because when she, for example, when she cooks, so she has a project called Cocina Baobab, and it's specifically about cooking food of African roots. And she cooks a lot of Senegalese food, obviously, because that's what she grew up with. And it's funny too how she said that she told me that a lot of the Senegalese people that migrated to Mexico migrated in the 70s through like a scholarship program, and a lot of them were men. And she was telling me how a lot of the men had to learn how to cook because there were no women to cook their favorite Senegalese dishes there for them. So they had to learn how to cook for themselves. And so then that's kind of how she learned, was from her dad. Yeah, she's told me that she uses she'll use like Jamaica to make this, it's called bisap. It's a drink in Senegal, and she makes it with ginger. And when she sells it in Mexico, she refers to the drink as hibiscus, which is hibiscus, which is Jamaica. And I think it's just interesting that she doesn't call it flor de Jamaica or like agua de Jamaica senegalesa. Like, I'm wondering if there's like a marketing choice in the way that she refers to it. But yeah, and she says that, like, for example, in, like she says in the film too, that in Mexico we associate tamarindo with dulce, so with sweets, with candy, or like agua or atole and stuff like that. But in Senegal, it's definitely used for like curries and like savory dishes. And I think that probably the most similar thing that I've seen definitely is the agua, the juice. It looks very similarly made to me. And I even met someone from Ghana, not from Senegal, but from Ghana, so West Africa, who had never been to Mexico, and he was just there on like a conference, and he was with my friend, and so we kind of like toured him around Mexico City. He did not know any Spanish. I think this is the first time I had met someone who didn't even know hola. Like, he would say hola to him, and he was like, what? And so it was just interesting. He came straight from Ghana to Mexico for this conference, and we went to like a Mexican restaurant with him, like a really popular one in El Centro, and he wanted something to drink, like a juice or something like that. And he was like, I want something that's really Mexican. And we were all like, oh, let's just get him and I want a Jamaica. And then when he drank it, he was like, this tastes exactly like I think it was called Subulu, where he said where he was from. And we were like, oh yeah, because Jamaica is from Africa. So I think that those similarities are just really fun to know. And I know that there's also, I can't think of the name right now. I should have brought it in my notes, but there's like a West African sort of not pastry thing, but there's something that's wrapped in hoja de plátano, banana leaf, and it looks very much like tamales oaxaqueños, they call them. Even though I've been told by Oaxacan people that those are not only tamales oaxaqueños, but they look like tamales that are wrapped in banana leaf. And so and they're also made with maize, no sé cómo decir, maize in English, I think that's what it's called, in West Africa. And I can't think of the specific name right now, but I know that's the thing. So it's cool to see those similarities. And I'm not sure about how those dishes came to be, or where the like cross was in that sense, because maize is also from this side of the world too.
No, this is so interesting. And the Chile, for example, transiting to Asia and transiting to Africa as well. And the crops themselves. There is a bunch of resources that Adán Griego is pointing us towards in the library. If people are interested in that, that's in the chat. And also a link to some of the multimedia campaign on the Afrodescendientes findings in the Mexican census of 2020. So I do want to point that out. And also to one of the first persons who asked, where can we get the movie? EPF Media is making it available during the next week. I assume it is still in festivals. So to the extent that it is in festivals, it cannot be yet kind of widely distributed, I think, for lessons and stuff like that, or what is the status of that for classes?
Yeah, it can be distributed. It can be distributed in classes. I've had a lot of even Q&As in small classes at community colleges or universities too. You can go on EPF's website and see where you can get it. It's also available on Canopy too, if anybody has access.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So Canopy is many universities will have connection to Canopy if you use it for educational purposes. Alexander Farias has a really interesting question, contrasting with his experience in Brazil. So something that caught his attention was the use of masks when people were performing on your movie. And he says, as long as I perceived on my own research in Brazil with Black communities, it's kind of a recurrent presence. So whether you can tell us something about the masks presence in the Black culture in Mexico.
Yeah, so the masks were specifically about the Danza de los Diablos. And Danza de los Diablos is a traditional dance in the Costa Chica de Guerrero y Oaxaca. And they specifically dance it during Dia de Muertos. And but I think it's funny because now Danza de los Diablos has become almost like an emblem of Afro Mexico. Like if there's someone who, I don't know, makes a flyer about Afro Mexico and they want to have something to illustrate that flyer with, they'll probably they'll probably put that mask, the Danza de los Diablos mask on there. And well, there was also La Minga too. La Minga was also was also a mask. And what I've been told about Danza de los Diablos, it was that it was a dance that occurred in during like colonial times, and it's kind of like a resistance dance. And this is what I've been told by Chaisuri mostly, who are from that region. And it's called Danza de los Diablos because that's what the Spanish colonizers would call Black and Indigenous people, those Diablos. So it's kind of like a reclaiming of that in that sense. And then it goes into this whole dance, and it's really cute because, or I really liked it because I went during Dia de Muertos, and I totally forgot that Danza de los Diablos happened during Dia de Muertos. And so there were those, so that what they do is they go from house to house and they dance in front of every house. And then the other mask was La Minga, which is like people who they dress up as a woman. Men will dress up as women, and then they'll put the white mask on, and then they'll put a wig on. And you probably saw like a few scenes of them like dancing around and stuff too. And I can't exactly, I remember reading, I don't want to say anything too unsure because it's been a while since I read about La Minga and what they've also told me about her. So I don't want to say anything that might be like false information. So I think I'll just tell people to go look up La Minga and read that history.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that there is also, of course, the very prevalent Matamoros, kind of Santiago Matamoros reenactments in the dances in central Mexico. And those are very striking when you think about it, because they are showing a darker skinned Northern African fighting a blonde Spanish, right? And the Spanish win, but the reappropriation by indigenous communities of this dance as a symbolism of the conquest, that has been kind of studied quite a bit, and I think it's the same kind of flip side of what you are talking about in indigenous communities. But anyway, I mean, just as a reflection, there is a really nice question about diaspora from an anonymous attendee, and I think it is also an interesting question. What makes you part of a diaspora, or what are the diasporas that we can talk about? And maybe, you know, this is also a reflection on how we think of our place of origin, right? Which I think a lot of what you've been telling us makes us challenge even what it means to talk about a diaspora, right?
Yeah, I think for me, the diaspora is community. I think it is home for me. I think that I find a lot of joy being in community with people from the African diaspora. I think partially it could also be because I didn't grow up with a lot of Black people in my surroundings, and so when I went to college, and I went to University of Southern California, which still doesn't have like a super high Black population, but it was more than I had growing up in Porterville, and so I felt like, oh my gosh, I found my people, you know. But I think that's what it is, especially when you know, I never had like a physical, like I don't really have like a physical definition of what home is. Like home for me is not really tied to land. And now when I think about it, and I think about like the history of specifically the African diaspora and the way that Africans were displaced from their land and brought to this side of the world, that it makes me think that I feel like maybe a lot of, at least in my experience, especially meeting other folks from the diaspora, and especially Mexico City, I meet like a lot of people from Brazil, or I'll meet people from Colombia or Cuba, or even from Africa. And we just all find this sense of home and family when we're with each other. And so for me, I think that that's what diaspora is. And yeah, it's just been, those moments have been really beautiful for me. And also even just those little moments of when I see other Black people in Mexico, we give each other the nod, or we say hi. I've made friends by just saying hi to them. And that's what it is for me. I know that it has a different definition for different folks, but that's how it is for me.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions about how you choose your subjects, and also something about when their subjects first learn that they are Afro-Mexican. So I don't know how you thought about this. Is it just like, you know, you play it by ear, or do you have a little bit of a plan? how do you end up choosing who has to be in your film? And what happens when they discover themselves as Afro-Mexican, or they first learn that they have to think of themselves as Afro-Mexican?
Yeah, the people I chose in the film are all my friends, which I know doesn't say much because I have a decent amount of friends who are of the diaspora in Mexico, but I specifically chose them because of, as I kind of mentioned a little bit in the beginning, because of the variety of their Blackness, but also the variety of their interests. And so first of all, I wanted to interview people who had like diverse backgrounds in their Blackness. Like I wanted to interview someone whose parent was a migrant. And then I also wanted to interview people whose Blackness has been in Mexico for many generations. And I wanted to interview people who are from La Costa, like Chay Suri, but then people who grew up in Mexico City, like Marbella and Sena and Leona. And then I also wanted to interview people who were of queer experience and who were women and stuff like that. And so I was very intentional too with all of the different intersections of our identities and with the interests. I was also very intentional about the interests. Like I said, Sena is a chef and she's also Senegalese. And so she was kind of the perfect bridge of illustrating the connection that Mexico has with African, specifically West African Senegalese gastronomy. And because I don't have like a budget to go fly to Africa and show that, so she was the bridge to show that, and she's a chef. And then I chose to interview Chai and Suri because they're musicians and they're from La Costa, and I wanted to show kind of the instruments they play, and I wanted to use a lot of the music as like almost like a rhythm that takes you through the documentary. And Suri is also a dancer, so a lot of the zapateado sounds that we hear are by Suri or by other people who also do zapateado. And then Leona is a poet, and I knew I kind of wanted to do like intersperses of poetry in the documentary. And so that's why I specifically interviewed her. And then I hadn't actually met Marbella when I did the first round of interviews. I think I mentioned too that I interviewed Marbella after I had already edited the first cut. But when I was thinking about making it longer, I had met Marbella, and she's born and raised in Mexico City, but her family is from La Costa Chica, Guerrero, so she would go back at least once a year. And whenever we were talking, we were just friends, and we were talking, and she would tell me these like really cute anecdotes about her and her cousins playing with agua de Jamaica or tamarindo in La Costa. And I was like, would you be interested in sharing those stories for the camera? And so that's how I added Marbella, just because she had very like personal touches and very personal, beautiful stories about Jamaica y Tamarindo with her family. And yeah, so that's why I chose those specific people. And yeah, and then the woman in the back at the end of the credits, if for those of y'all who stopped at the credits, there is actually a surprise at the end of the credits. So I would recommend going back if you hadn't. But she's Chai Suri's aunt, and she lives in La Costa Chica, Oaxaca.
I'll have to go after the credits. I am sorry. I have a question for Maria Avila Arcos, and I think it follows very, very neatly with what you just said. In your film, you depict people who are very aware of their African roots. But in my experience, not many people in the Costa Chica, or at least not those not involved in the recognition movement, have a particular connection with Africa. They just see themselves as Mexicans who happen to be dark-skinned, or negros, are not aware of their African ancestors. Is that your experience too? And how did you explain your project when you were filming in the Costa Chica?
I personally, it is not my experience directly. I think I've heard it from other people, but whenever I've met people in La Costa Chica, there is like an awareness. I guess it's more of negro, no? Como, oye, mi negro, and that stuff. But I feel like there's like a risen awareness. And I mean, when you think about it, like there's pueblos in La Costa Chica that the census just came out, and 98% of the people in those pueblos identified as Afro-Mexicanos, Afrodescendientes, or negros. So I do think that there is an awareness, and maybe there's been a heightened awareness within the past few years. So, but I have heard that like my friends Chai Suri, I had gone to La Costa Chica to film with them. And so I was like staying at their family's house, and we were going and we were filming together because we were also filming for a music video that they did. They're musicians. And so I think my experience too was, it was nice going with them because I didn't want to just be kind of like the outsider coming in and filming and like not knowing anything, you know. So I had already been to the La Costa Chica too a few times before that with other people staying like with community, but it was nice going with them. And I remember them specifically also telling me like, oh, you know, there's other pueblos that are really aware of their Blackness, but we feel that our pueblo isn't as aware yet of our African heritage. But when the census came out, their pueblo also was like in the 95 percentile region of identifying as Afro. So I do think that there's definitely like a more of an awareness than there probably was before. But that also is kind of, it also does attribute to the erasure in Mexico of Blackness. And even the people in the film who said like, you know, some of them said that they came into their Afro heritage later, or they knew that they were, but they didn't really feel it until they moved to Mexico City and they really had to like come face to face to it. Or some of them said they always knew they were Black, but they were just afraid to kind of admit it because of the like internalized erasure, which then turns into internalized racism. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. And I think it goes back to like there's not a lot of history. And because I think of another documentary that's out that's called Negra by my friend Medellin de Wolde. It's hard to, I always have trouble saying her last name, but she did a documentary about 5 Afro-Mexican women in different parts of Mexico. And one of the parts in that film talks about a woman from La Costa, and she says, honestly, when you think about it, who would be proud that they're the grandson or the granddaughter of a slave? Like nobody would be proud to admit that. And that part just made me like super sad. It like really touched, it like almost made me cry because it made me think about just like the lack of history, the lack of history of resistance that's told in Mexico. Like I grew up always being proud of being Black because I had those references. I had like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Like I knew about those people when I was younger. So I never felt any shame about my ancestors being enslaved people. But if you don't have the history, then I guess it's hard to say because I haven't had that, but I can see just by the way that she was saying how people wouldn't want to claim that. And so I think that, yeah, like just even just digging into the history, making it more collective and more public is gonna get more people to kind of reconcile with their African roots.
That is so striking, Ebony, and you made me think immediately of how little awareness there is of Mexico, of our second president, Vicente Guerrero being Afro-Mexicano, but always whitened throughout our history books and our visual depictions of our first African president. I want to read this one. It is more a comment about racism in Mexico, but I want to read it in Spanish in her own words. Yvette García Casas, yo quiero agradecerte por este documental. Yo nací en el DF, Ciudad de México, crecí a 10 minutos de la UNAM y ahora vivo en California. Y siempre les digo que en México somos muy racistas. Ahora tengo un niño de 7 años que su papá es negro y yo de México. Y siempre que vamos a México, hasta con mi familia, ellos, mi esposo y mi hijo son los negritos. Qué bueno que ya estamos hablando de los africanos en México. Gracias.
Ay, gracias.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thoughts. Let me ask you about a question from Rocio Fregoso. She's asking, as you are progressing with your degree, would you share, can you share more about what type of work you think you will work on, or when, where to find it so we can support the work that you will be doing?
Thanks. Well, I'm in this weird spot of where I'm actually done with class and I'm done with my theses and all that stuff, but because of the pandemic, just the bureaucratic processes of actually titulándome, of actually graduating have been slowed. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, you can. I've been kind of doing like a lot of different types of things, like freelancing, some doing like freelance video producing and stuff like that, but also working on some new projects that have to do more with Blackness on the border. But right now they're very, very baby projects. And and you can follow, I guess you can follow me and just know what I'm up to if you go on my social medias. I'm Ebony Marie B on all of social media, and I'm gonna put it in the chat here. But yeah, just to know where I'm at and stuff, I think that's good. And also, if you want to follow the film, it's on Facebook at Jamaica y Tamarindo Film. Yes, that's on Facebook. And yeah, I'm just like applying for grants and stuff like that. My projects are super baby, so I haven't really, I can't talk too much about them, but I'm excited. I'm excited to keep on doing this work.
Let me follow up with another question. I still have a couple that I've skipped because of the way the conversation is going, but I will go back to you in a minute. But Aurea Pascal, I think it follows from the conversation we were having also about the way we use our language. So she tells you, "Hi, Ebony, your film is very beautiful, congratulations," and opens the door to how we use, even in our same families, words like prietita, that can harm a child since a very young age. Could you tell us more about these experiences?
Yeah, I think that's something that is true. I think that, I mean, you know that the word prieta is like a pejorative word too, that is actually being reclaimed also by a lot of people of darker skin in Mexico. So, you know, I think that that's kind of like a cool aspect too, that people are reclaiming this. But I do think that it can harm a child from a very young age. I think that I've been fortunate where I didn't really have those experiences in my own family. And I think that it has to do with like my own family also having a lot of growth with these issues before I was even born, because I have older cousins who are also Blaxican. But so I was actually thinking about this the other day, like what it would have been like if one of my like great grandparents or something like kept calling me Morenita or Petita or whatever when I was younger, and like how that would have shaped my experience of just being like thought of, being affirmed in a way that affirms my skin color first before it even affirms like my humanity, if that makes sense. And I know like what Leona said, like it doesn't have harmful intentions, but that doesn't mean that it's not harmful. Like Leona, it's like normalized racism. And so when children grow up with that, it makes me think about like what some of the folks said in the film, you know, that they didn't grow up like acknowledging their Afro side or their Blackness until they were older and they were more proud of it. But yeah, that can have a lot of harmful effects.
I'm muted. Yes. So we have, do you remember, I have a couple of people raising their hand in the attendees. Do type your question in the Q&A box so that I can read it to our guest. We have a question from Adrienne Lazaro, who wants to know if you want to share some of your thoughts about things like 23andMe. A very, very controversial, very complicated topic.
I was gonna say that's interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, I've done it. I've done the ancestry test, and my brother, we've done the ancestry tests, and I think that, yeah, it's hard. I think it's complicated because I think a lot of people, especially people who've had our histories ripped away from us, want to know más o menos where we come from. I think it's hard to, like, for me, with my African side, like a lot of it was ascribed to Nigeria, and it's like hard to say because back then Nigeria wasn't a thing, you know, like these borders are really recent. So it's also just to, like, you know, I'm taking it with a grain of salt because like these borders were just drawn not that long ago. But I think it's kind of like cool in one aspect that, for example, with like in my Mexican heritage, like it showed like how much of my side was indigenous descent, and then how much was of European descent. And I think that was just something that I was just curious about. but I also, I don't know, I feel like there is also kind of like harm in, especially with it, I'm thinking specifically Mexico, of just claiming indigenous when you see those types of results coming out, when there's no ties to any like actual indigenous community that is still here today. So and I've just heard this from people who I know who are indigenous in Mexico, that it's like there's more to claiming indigenous than to just get a test and get like percentages, and then that kind of like goes all into it goes into like scientific racism, no, of like categorizing people by their percentages and stuff. And so I think on one hand it's like interesting if you're curious to know a little bit more about your history, but I don't think that you should be, I don't, maybe I shouldn't say you should be, but I do think there's like issues with like these hardcore like percentage categorization type things that is like reproducing like colonial ways of categorizing humans. Yeah.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I did it myself but I did use the National Geographic one, which has a very different philosophy about the way they conceive of the project. So it is about collecting scientific data of the human diaspora, just connecting to and they are not willing to give you things like telling you you're from this country or that country. That's completely anachronistic. You are from maybe the Mediterranean area, or you have some. I think that's the way we have to think about these issues. It is the human migration that we're all part of in different ways. But anyway, that's my own advertisement of don't use 23andMe. I think go with the National Geographic one. Sorry.
What did I use? I used ancestry.com.
But I mean, the other thing is these are private companies, and the National Geographic one, the data set becomes part of a scientific community. But anyway, that's so there's a question about whether you think or whether if Afro-Mexicans are organizing their rights to be recognized by the state. So you mentioned this thing, for example, about how some communities in the Costa Chica will be, 90% Afro-Mexicanos. And I'm, this question is from Elizabeth, where she's asking, indigenous movements in Mexico have obviously become very organized about recognizing their autonomies. But I'm also thinking, adding to this, Colombia has the resguardos, in which, Afro-Colombian communities were recognized by the state with a whole series of guarantees for their own self-governance. So I wonder whether you have any thoughts on this.
Well, I don't think we mentioned it yet, but Afro-Mexicanos were just recognized in the National Constitution of Mexico in 2019 for the first time. And as we said, the census just counted Afro-Mexicanos, Afrodescendientes, y Personas Negras in the census last year for the very first time in history. And then a few weeks ago was when the results came out. And both of these initiatives that are recognitions from the state were driven by organization of Afro-Mexicans that has been happening for the past decades. And so there are a lot of organizations and colectivos in La Costa Chica and in Mexico City and in other parts of Mexico that are fighting for this visibility and for this recognition of the state. And now that Afro-Mexicans are recognized in the Constitution, they have specific kind of allocations of resources. I see it a lot, for example, in film, because that's where it's like my campo. But I see that there's specific grants that are targeted toward indigenous people and towards Afro people. And so there's things like that's happening. And I think that what happens next is going to be a result of that continued organization of Afro-Mexicanos. And just like this continued legacy of what they've been doing for decades. And I think that part of the recognition of in the Constitution was, which what a lot of these organizations were saying, is that this is not the end. This is not a favor from the government. This is a deuda histórica. This is a historic debt that you owe us for 400 years of erasure. And so this is just the beginning. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And what's happening, a lot of stuff has still been happening even in the pandemic with a lot of colectivos and organizations.
Well, I think we are also very excited to know what you're going to come up with next, because I am sure there's just so many stories, so many things we simply don't know, beyond the something as simple as Jamaica and Tamarindo that every Mexican knows, right? And being able to highlight something which is just present, but we have chosen not to see, right, as societies. So I want to end, there are a couple more questions, but I do want to end with the last 3 minutes asking you a question a little bit about, when you think about the US and there is this whole sense, that maybe things are at a tipping point, Black Lives Matter and the whole, social mobilization and greater awareness of all the pending issues. But maybe we thought that also in the time of Martin Luther King and in the 1960s and the civil rights movement. And then it took 40 years. So I do want to follow up a little bit with your question. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I want to share your optimism. But do you think this kind of societal transformations, can happen quickly through things like media, like art, artists, music, video, or are there things that require 40 years of struggles and legislation and changes, and even after 40 years, there's so little headway that has been done, at least in this country, in the United States? 60 years, I should say, more than 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say because I'm not like an organizer, like I'm not in like the political arena, but I am in the art arena, and I do think that art does have the potential, at least to allow us to see the possibilities of what a new world can look like, or to see the possibilities of what Black joy can look like, for example. Like that's kind of the message that I wanted to take, at least with Jamaica and Tamarindo, was just to show the joy that there is in Blackness in Mexico, that we don't see a lot. But yeah, so I think, media has also been a tool for oppression for a lot of years. It's also been a tool for erasure and in art as well. And so I think that it can be used as a tool for resistance. On the flip side, it can be used as a tool for empowerment, for resistance, for imagining new worlds. Like I think a lot about, I've been reading, I like to read like historical fiction a lot. And even just like the way that they paint how the past was, I think can kind of be applied to painting how the future could be. And then thinking about like science fiction too. There's an author that I read that says that science fiction can also be a tool for community organization because it allows us to imagine what new worlds are like. And so I do in that sense that art can be used for that. And I think that can coincide with organizational struggle, with political struggle, with also struggle that doesn't depend, or, ¿cómo se llama? Como lucha autogestivo. What is the word for that in English? Like self-determined struggle, yeah. And community organizing, and but being in community as a resource, and knowing that community is your biggest resource. I think that that's really important too.
That's a beautiful point to end, Evoni, our conversation today. We've been talking about your movie, the gift you gave us of Jamaica Tamarindo. This was with director Evoni Bailey. I do want to remind everyone that if you want to take a look at not just her materials, but different materials in EPF Media, they have wonderful instructional materials. They have wonderful movies of anything that you would be interested related to Latin America and the current struggles, debates, and aspirations and dreams of the region. So please spend some time doing that in the afternoon or in the weekend. Thank you so much, Evoni, for your being with us. And thank you everyone at Bolivar House, and thank you our attendees.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for being here. It was a real pleasure answering everybody's questions and just feeling your presence.